The air above the lava lake shimmered like a fever dream, thick with heat distortion and the acrid tang of scorched minerals. Quant Derren squinted from the edge of the blackened ridge, one hand shielding his face. The lava pulsed far below in slow, deliberate surges, like the breath of some buried god. 15 meters across, maybe 20, the lake stretched between two fractured cliffs, glowing with a deep orange malevolence. "To cross it," said Arzek, "would be to prove your species worthy of inclusion in the Path Concord." The alien's skin was mottled turquoise, his eyes unblinking discs of obsidian. His voice came smooth and cold, like water trickling over glass. Quant turned to face him, sweat already soaking his collar. "You're serious? You want me to cross that?" Arzek nodded once. "No human has completed the trial, most do not attempt it. The others fail, right?" Quant muttered. "That's reassuring." The expedition had landed 3 days earlier on Volatile 9, a scorched volcanic world orbiting a dying star. The Concord had invited representatives from emerging species to prove their resilience through a series of cultural and physical trials. Quant hadn't expected to be the only human on the team. He certainly hadn't expected to be handpicked by Arzek, the ancient mentor of the Path Concord himself, for what was apparently a rite of passage. "I assume you're not giving me a hoverpad?" Quant asked, bending to pick up a charred rock. It crumbled in his hand. "You may use anything you forge with your own hands," Arzek said, "but no anti-grav technology, no atmospheric shielding, and no external assistance from others." Quant glanced around at the makeshift outpost they'd erected on the cliff's edge. Most of the other species had long since moved on to different trials. Only a few curious aliens remained, observing from shaded shelters with detached interest. The human module sat a dozen meters back, half collapsed from the initial landing impact. "Metal scraps," Quant said aloud. "That's all I've got left." Arzek tilted his head slightly. "Then make them enough." Quant gave a low whistle and turned away, boots crunching over black gravel as he headed toward the heap of twisted remains that had once been his atmospheric lander. He didn't miss the way the other aliens watched him, some with amusement, others with pity. Crossing a lake of lava wasn't just dangerous. It was suicidal. He got to work anyway. The sun never fully set on Volatile 9. It dipped low behind the horizon, casting long shadows and bathing the landscape in a bruised twilight. Quant spent the first night pulling apart the ruined lander. Every panel, every strut, every bolt became fair game. He laid them out on the ground, categorizing by size and weight. By morning he had a plan, a stupid plan, a reckless plan, but maybe, just maybe, one that could work. He spent 2 hours testing the lake's edge, tossing metal slats onto the lava to see how long they'd last. Most sank immediately, consumed by the heat. But a few thicker alloyed pieces floated for a handful of seconds before blackening and folding inward. "Not enough," he muttered, wiping soot from his hands. He needed something that would distribute his weight, resist the heat long enough to span the distance, and hold together without melting. Welding was out of the question. The portable torch had been lost in the crash. So Quant turned to mechanical locks, hinges, hooks, folded flanges. He bent metal using rocks as makeshift anvils. He hammered with a scavenged hydraulic piston. Arzek observed from a distance, silent as a statue. 3 days in, Quant's hands were blistered and raw. His shoulders ached from hammering, and he hadn't slept more than a few hours at a time. But now he had the beginnings of a platform, a broad raft of interlocking alloy plates, curved slightly upward like a sled. It wasn't pretty, but it floated. Sort of. He tested it on the lava's edge. The platform hissed and buckled but didn't sink immediately. It slid forward a few meters before the heat warped the front slats. Quant dragged it back with a hooked pole, cursing under his breath. "Too hot," he said. "Need more insulation." He tried layering ceramic plating from the lander's inner hull. It cracked under pressure but lasted longer than bare steel. He added a second layer, then a third. The raft grew heavier, harder to push, but it floated longer. On the 6th day, Quant stepped onto it for the first time. The heat blasted upward, suffocating and dry. His boots smoked. He jumped back off, chest heaving. "Not gonna work like this," he muttered. he retreated to the edge of camp where an overturned supply crate held the last of his rations. He sat down hard, drinking tepid water and staring at the sky. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Arzek, approaching slowly. "You have made progress," Arzek said. Quant didn't look up. "Not enough." Arzek sat beside him, folding his limbs in a way that didn't seem physically possible. "You are unlike the others. Because I'm still trying. Because you expect to succeed," Quant laughed once, bitter and dry. "I expect to not die, that's about it." Arzek tilted his head. "You are aware this trial is not mandatory." "Yeah. That's why I'm doing it." Quant stood, joints protesting. "You wanted to see what humans could do, so I'm going to show you." The raft took another 3 days to reinforce. Quant bolted angular side shields to deflect heat, added a thin layer of reactor coolant piping to the base, and filled it with the last of his thermal gel. It wouldn't last long, but it might last long enough. He built a long metal pole 5 meters in length, tipped with a jagged hook. It would help him push the raft forward across the lake. There were no handrails, no safety nets. If he slipped, he'd fall in. The morning of the attempt, a crowd gathered. Dozens of species, many of whom had dismissed him earlier, now stood in silent rows along the cliff. Their expressions unreadable. Quant wore a patched-up pressure suit. It seems reinforced with ceramic tape. It wouldn't keep out the heat for long. But again, just maybe long enough. As he stepped onto the raft, the heat hit him like a wall. His eyes watered instantly. The soles of his boots sizzled. He dropped the pole onto the metal, crouched, and began to push. The raft lurched forward. He moved slowly, each push of the pole deliberate, careful. The metal groaned beneath him, warping with every meter. Steam hissed from the coolant piping. The outer shields blackened, then began to flake. Quant kept going, 5 meters in. 10. The heat was unbearable. Sweat soaked his back, then evaporated before it reached his waist. His palms blistered through the gloves. The pole caught on something. He yanked it free, 15 meters. The front of the raft began to sag. The outer slats curled upward, threatening to snap. Quant dropped to one knee, shifting his weight back. The raft balanced. "Come on," he muttered. "Come on, just a few more." With a final shove, the raft scraped against the far edge of the cliff. Quant leapt, boots skidding on the black rock. The raft sagged behind him, then folded in on itself and sank in a hiss of steam. He collapsed on his side, coughing. His suit was scorched, his hands shook, but he was alive. Arzek appeared a moment later, stepping lightly down the slope. "You crossed," the alien said. Quant rolled onto his back, gasping. "Yeah, I crossed." Arzek regarded him for a moment. "Well done, Quant Derren. You have shown what your kind is capable of." Quant didn't answer. He was too busy trying not to throw up. The mentor knelt beside him, placing a cool hand on his shoulder. "Rest. Your trial is over." Quant closed his eyes. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to breathe, and from the far side of the lake, 100 alien eyes stared in silence, not with pity, not with amusement, but with something very close to respect. Quant's eyelids twitched against the sterile bite of overhead light. The scent of scorched polymer and antiseptic hung in the air, sharp and dry. His chest felt tight, as if someone had filled his lungs with gravel and left him under a sunlamp for a week. The mattress beneath him was too firm, the sheet tucked too tight. He blinked again, slower this time, his vision clearing to a pale ceiling laced with faintly glowing conduits. A low, chittering sound came from his left. Something shifted beside his bed. "You're awake," said a voice, high and tonal, like wind through reeds. Quant turned his head with effort. A creature stood at his bedside, tall, lanky, covered in pale green scales that shimmered faintly under the medbay lights. Its 2 lower arms were folded behind its back, while the upper pair held a translucent tablet that flickered with biometric readings. "You're human. That is, unanticipated," the creature added, tapping the tablet with a claw. Quant coughed once. His throat felt like it had been sandblasted. "You must be the doctor," he rasped. "Medical technician," the creature corrected. "I am called Veltric. I volunteered to monitor your recovery because I was curious." Quant tried to sit up, but his torso screamed in protest. Veltric made a low, clicking noise. "You should remain horizontal. Your dermal layers have undergone thermal trauma, and your circulatory system is compensating poorly." "Yeah," Quant rasped. "That tracks." Veltric adjusted a dial on a nearby console. A muted hiss followed, and a cooling sensation crept up Quant's spine. You were unconscious for nearly 19 hours. The suit was fused to your outer garments in several regions. We excised it manually. Your body temperature spiked to dangerous levels, but your internal organs remained stable. I am unfamiliar with your basal metabolic thresholds, but your readings were inconsistent with expected collapse. Quant gave a dry chuckle, then winced. We're full of surprises, I guess. Veltric tilted its head. So it would appear you experienced significant fluid loss. Your electrolytes were unstable. You should have been comatose. Quant stared at the ceiling. Yeah, well, I really didn't want to fall in. Veltric made a scribbling motion on the tablet. You consumed no hydration fluids during the final day. You demonstrated signs of muscular degradation and neural fatigue, but you continued exertion without pause. Why? Quant rolled his head toward Veltric. Because there wasn't a tomorrow if I didn't finish. The technician studied him a moment longer, then it tapped something on the screen. A gentle beeping began near the head of the bed. You are not permitted to leave for at least one full cycle, Veltric said. Rest. I will return later to assess tissue regeneration. Quant nodded faintly. Thanks. Veltric left without another word, the door hissing shut behind it. Quant closed his eyes again, letting the silence press down over him. 3 hours later, the silence was broken by a voice that didn't wait for permission. You know, most people don't make it across the lava lake because they assume the trial's metaphorical. Quant opened one eye. Arzek stood at the foot of the bed, hands folded behind his back, posture regal as ever. He looked exactly as he had before, unbothered by heat, pressure, or the general absurdity of life. I didn't get the metaphor memo, Quant said. Arzek made a low hum. You did not need it. Quant struggled upright again, slower this time, and managed to lean against the wall. So what now? He asked. Do I get a merit badge or a ceremonial fruit basket? You will be formally acknowledged at the Concord's next summit. Your actions have altered the standing assessment of humanity's development stage. That sounds like a fancy way of saying you're putting us under more surveillance. Correct, Arzek said. Quant sighed. At least you're honest. Arzek stepped forward, his gaze scrutinizing. The Concord has observed thousands of emerging species. Physical endurance is not uncommon. Ingenuity appears in varying degrees. But humans display a pattern that defies prediction. You persist even when logic fails. You improvise past the point of collapse. You refuse to concede even to the inevitable. Quant offered a weak grin. We're a stubborn bunch. There is a difference between stubbornness and what you demonstrated, Arzek said. You burned your own body to accomplish a task no one else would attempt. Why? Quant didn't answer right away. He watched the pulse monitor on the screen beside him, listened to its steady rhythm. Because someone had to, he said at last. I didn't want to be the guy who left the challenge sitting there, waiting for someone else to die trying. Arzek considered that in silence. The others watched you. They did not speak, but many recorded. Your method was flawed, your materials inadequate, your success statistically improbable. Nice to know I made an impression. Some of them have requested access to your design schematics. Quant blinked. Wait, seriously. They do not understand why it worked. They believe there is a hidden principle they failed to perceive. Quant barked a laugh, then winced and clutched his ribs. The hidden principle is panic and desperation, he said. You can't teach that. Arzek remained motionless. There is more to discuss, but not here. When you are ambulatory, you will accompany me to the archive chamber. Great, Quant muttered. Homework. Arzek turned to go. Rest for now, but be prepared. The Concord does not revisit assumptions lightly. Some intend to challenge your claim. Quant watched him leave. His legs itched under the sheets. He was starving, parched, and his muscles felt like rusted cables. But somewhere deep beneath all that, a flicker of excitement stirred. 6 hours later, after a nutrient infusion and a cautious test of his mobility, Quant was cleared to walk with assistance. Veltric returned, now wearing a harness with 2 stabilizer rods that extended to help guide Quant's steps. They left the medbay through a rear corridor that sloped downward into the base's lower levels, where the air grew colder and the walls became lined with etched metal panels. Where are we going? Quant asked between breaths. Archive chambers, Veltric said. Mentor Arzek is waiting. The chamber was circular and dimly lit, with a domed ceiling that shimmered faintly with embedded fiber optics. Along the walls, hundreds of alien faces stared out from recessed alcoves, holographic busts of every species that had passed the trials. Arzek stood at the center, beside a low pedestal where a new alcove had been carved. It was empty. You came, Arzek said. Didn't want to miss the party, Quant replied. Arzek gestured to the pedestal. Place your hand here. Quant hesitated, then stepped forward and pressed his palm to the cool surface. A hum vibrated through his arm, then ceased. From the ceiling, tiny lights traced downward, coalescing into a hazy projection, his own face, etched in pale blue light. It hovered, shimmering, then faded into the alcove where it solidified. Quant stared at it. Weird, he muttered. I look tired. You look like someone who completed the impossible, Arzek said. A chime sounded from the far side of the chamber. A wide door slid open, revealing 3 Concord delegates, one with a glittering fronded crest, another encased in translucent armor, and the third a wispy form suspended in a gravity field. They are not here to honor you, Arzek said quietly. They have come to contest your achievement. Quant turned to face them. Of course they have. Some believe your species has manipulated the trial's intent. They claim your methods were unorthodox, your success unrepeatable. Quant crossed his arms, ignoring the ache in his shoulders. You want me to defend myself? No, Arzek said. I want you to show them why they're wrong. The delegates approached, forming a loose half-circle around Quant. The one with the crest leaned forward slightly. You claim to represent your species' capabilities, it said, voice filtered through a translator node. Yet your actions suggest recklessness, not advancement. Quant tilted his head. You think we're reckless because we take chances, because you risk annihilation for abstract goals. Quant took a step forward. You call it abstract, I call it survival. We don't always have the luxury of perfect options. Sometimes you just have to make something work with whatever's left. The armored delegate's helmet shimmered. Emotion clouded your judgment. That is not evolution, that is regression. Quant met its gaze. Emotion's why I made it across. It's not a flaw. It's what kept me alive when logic said I shouldn't be. The third delegate, the wispy one, hovered closer. Demonstrate it again, Quant blinked. What? A second crossing, with no prior preparation, we will observe. He turned to Arzek, whose expression remained unreadable. You serious? Arzek gave a faint nod. You will not be alone this time, but you must decide whether to accept. Quant looked back at the delegates. His skin still burned from healing blisters. His legs trembled if he stood too quickly. And yet, I'll do it, he said. The chamber fell silent. But I'm not doing it the same way, he added. Give me one day, I'll build something better. The delegates exchanged glances. Then they stepped back as if granting space to a predator they didn't fully understand. Veltric's voice broke the quiet. You are, quite unstable, Quant grinned. You're not wrong. He turned on his heel, already cataloging the materials available, the layout of the forge, and the half-melted frame of the old raft. One more crossing. This time they'd really be watching. Quant crouched beside a pile of alloy remnants, brushing ash off a warped strut with the back of one bandaged hand. The med technician had cleared him reluctantly at dawn, after a full cycle of observation, a mineral infusion, and a long lecture about circulatory strain. His skin still pulled tight over healing burns, and his legs moved with a stiffness that made stairs feel like a personal affront. But he was upright, and he was working. The air outside the forge station stung his lungs. Not with heat, he'd compensated for that with a portable fan array, but with the bitter metallic bite of scorched atmosphere, the kind that clung to the back of the throat and reminded you that you weren't on Earth, or anywhere remotely designed for human lungs. Veltric hovered nearby, arms folded, watching. A few other aliens had gathered in a semicircle at a distance. 3 tall, feathery Zentari, 1 thick-shelled euloid with a carapace like cracked obsidian, and a hovering sphere-shaped being whose name Quant hadn't caught but who made a soft, whirring sound whenever it shifted position. None of them spoke. He didn't mind. Talking would have slowed him down. Instead, he focused on the components in front of him. The first raft had been a desperate improvisation. This one needed to be better, lighter, stronger, smarter. That piece is stress-fractured, Veltric said, pointing a claw at a bent girder. It will not hold under torsion. Planning to reinforce that junction, Quant muttered. Secondary brace, single axis, just need to reroute the load away from the midline. Veltric made a low, acknowledging click. You have studied structural mechanics. Only when things were falling apart. He reached for a plasma cutter and ignited it with a thumb switch. Sparks fanned out in a bright, hissing spray as he sliced clean through the damaged girder. The cutter's hum filled the space for several minutes as he trimmed a new support plate to size, flipped it over, and began to drill bolt holes by hand with a rotary impact. By mid-afternoon, the framework had begun to take shape. It was narrower than the original, but longer, with articulated joints that could flex upward under pressure rather than snap. Quant had added a central spine, a thick, heat-resistant beam salvaged from the lander's collapsed stabilizer fin, and mounted the slats to it in overlapping layers, like fish scales. "Why not use hover propulsion?" asked one of the Zentari, its voice musical and reedy. "Not part of the deal," Quant said. "Has to be human power all the way. You expend enormous effort on a task that offers no tangible reward," said the Euloid. "Your species is inefficient." Quant grabbed a spanner and tightened the bolts along the spine brace. "You're not wrong. But we get things done." The raft assembly consumed the remainder of the day and most of his remaining energy. By dusk, he'd scavenged every usable piece of ceramic shielding from the crash debris, melted it down in a portable kiln, and poured a thin composite layer over the raft's base. It hardened quickly, forming a mottled grayish crust across the bottom. He peeled off his gloves and flexed his fingers. The blisters had faded to pale, peeling patches, but the skin beneath was still raw. "You're pressing your cortisol levels too high again," Veltric said. "I can administer a modulator." "No time," Quant replied. "I'm fine." "You are not," Veltric said flatly, "but you will proceed anyway." Quant gave a slow nod. "Yeah, that's kind of the point." They moved the raft to the launch platform at first light. The lake glowed more brightly in the morning, its surface roiling with slow, syrup-thick waves of molten rock. A low wind carried flecks of ash overhead, and the ground beneath their feet was warm enough to soften the soles of Quant's boots. 3 Concord delegates stood at the far edge, silent and still. Arzek waited near the cliff, arms behind his back, his gaze fixed on the raft without expression. Quant stepped up beside him, breathing evenly. He wore a newly patched pressure suit thinner than the last, but reinforced at the joints with flexible carbon mesh, and sealed with high-temperature adhesive. Over it, he'd strapped a cooling harness salvaged from the medbay, its reservoirs loaded with cryo-gel that would last precisely 30 minutes. "This isn't a repeat," he said without looking at Arzek. "It's a demonstration." Arzek nodded once. "Understood." He stepped away. Quant placed one foot on the raft. It shifted slightly, but held. The ceramic coating hissed as it met the heat. He adjusted the long metal pole he'd rebuilt, now fitted with a multi-pronged base to prevent slippage, and leaned into it. The raft slid forward. The lake's heat surged upward, curling around him in waves. His visor fogged for a heartbeat, then cleared as the cooling system kicked in. He moved slowly, pushing the raft 1 meter at a time, the pole digging into the lava's crusted edges, 5 meters. The raft creaked under him, but the spine held. The flex joints absorbed the shifting pressure, rocking side to side like a suspension bridge in a storm. 7 meters. The cryo-gel reservoirs began to drain faster than expected. He adjusted the harness valve, rerouting flow to his torso and reducing circulation to his legs. His calves went numb almost immediately. 10 meters. The air turned syrupy. His breath slowed. His hands trembled on the pole and the raft dipped slightly at the front. He shifted his weight back, adjusted the pole angle, and pushed again. 12 meters. A sudden jet of gas erupted from the lake beside him, spraying molten droplets across the raft's side. One struck his left boot. The outer layer melted instantly. He shouted, pain flaring up his shin, but didn't stop. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder. 15 meters. The cooling harness gave a warning chirp. 20% power. He ignored it. The far edge of the cliff was visible now, distorted by heat shimmer but undeniably close, 17 meters. The raft's middle section sagged. The spine flexed downward. Quant dropped to one knee, shifted the pole behind him, and dragged himself forward with a grunt, 19 meters. His suit alarm pulsed once, then went silent. The cooling gel had run out. The temperature inside the suit began to spike. His vision darkened at the edges. 20 meters. He lunged. His hands struck hard rock. He rolled sideways, the raft tipping behind him and crashing into the lava with a final hiss. He lay on his back, gasping, his suit steaming in the morning air. The cliff was solid beneath him. He was across. Slow footsteps approached. Arzek appeared above him, flanked by the 3 Concord delegates. Their expressions had shifted, no longer skeptical but uncertain. The one encased in armor tilted its head slightly. "You improved the design," it said. Quant didn't sit up. He didn't trust his legs. "Yeah," he said. "Didn't want to die twice." The delegate stepped closer. "Your method was crude, inefficient, but undeniably effective." The Zentari representative hovered beside it. "No predictive model accounted for your survival." Quant laughed once, breathless. "That's the trick. We don't run on models." The third delegate said nothing. It simply turned and walked away. Veltric arrived moments later with a med stretcher and a scowl that could be felt through 6 layers of dermal plating. "You're going to require neural cooling and full electrolyte replacement," the technician snapped. "And don't argue. All your vitals are trying to escape in opposite directions." Quant didn't argue. He let Veltric lift him onto the stretcher and strap him in. As they ascended the slope toward the medbay, Arzek walked beside them. "There will be no further challenges," the mentor said. "The Concord has seen enough." Quant turned his head. "So we're in." "You are not disqualified," Arzek said. "For humans, that is nearly the same." Quant laughed again, then winced. "You're welcome," he muttered. 2 hours later, he lay in a cool, dim room, limbs wrapped in hydration sleeves, his skin treated with a thin layer of regenerative gel. Veltric busied itself with monitors and nutrient infusers. The air was quiet, the lights soft. "You will recover," Veltric said. Quant nodded faintly. "Was it worth it?" Veltric stared at him a long moment. "You altered the expectations of 600 species." With a plank of scrap metal and a pole, Quant closed his eyes. "Yeah," he said, "that sounds about right."